Tom, you need to unmute.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. This is the August 10th meeting of the Planning and Resource and Development Committee. Let's see, looking at the screen, it looks like we have all members present, including County Board Chair. Let's have approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Anyone want to make a motion for that?
I'll move approval, Mr. Chairman.
I'll take Supervisor Morehouse. And who seconded?
Supervisor Anderson.
Supervisor Anderson second. Okay, any corrections or additions? I have one. A note that I believe it was in the public comments section. Mr. Christofferson from the town of Elk Mound had asked to, I think there it is, yeah, had asked us to note that he had made comment in his comments. He had noted that the unzoned towns are not in favor of the new language brought forth in the draft land division ordinance because it looks like zoning in another form. Without objection, I'd like to add that to the minutes and note his public comment on that. Okay. Any other suggestions or changes? Then all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Okay, the minutes are approved. Do we have any public comments today?
Yes, Mr. Chair. John Sipple from NRCS is on with us on the Zoom call, and he would like to make a comment.
Oh, great. Go ahead, John.
Good morning, everybody. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Today I'm joining you guys as a concerned citizen. My name is John Sipple. I'm a resident of the town of Sherman. I feel currently Dunn County is at a tipping point for environmental problems, environmental issues coming up, more specifically groundwater. Recent data has shown that our surface water reductions in phosphorus are going well. We have data showing that water entering Lake Mahnomen is actually has a downward trend of phosphorus. Contrary to that, though, we have a significant increase in nitrogen entering our lake at the bridge at Lake Mahnomen. To me, this tells me we're doing our work on a surface water standpoint, but we're not doing our work from a groundwater protection standpoint, trying to protect and preserve that valuable natural resource that we have. Our current county strategic plan calls for environmental protection. The last couple of years, I was able to sit in indirectly and directly as part of the livestock siting committee process, as well as the groundwater ad hoc committee process. Both of those committees looked at additional environmental concerns, looked at additional environmental protections and ways we can help protect our surface waters and ways we can help protect our groundwater. As you guys prepare for tough decisions when it comes to a budget standpoint, I believe there is also a position for the Land and Water Conservation Department that's up for debate or up for discussion. I would ask you guys to look back at your previous plans, the strategic plan, as well as the ad hoc groundwater ad hoc plan, as well as the livestock siting plan, to look at what is being asked for from a land conservation department. Can these things be handled with less staff? Additionally, Land and Water, or LWCD, has also leveraged federal funds through partnerships with USDA. The Land and Water Department has brought in over $1 million to Dunn County, both from the producers, mostly from the producer standpoint. So working with the producers, getting them contracts through our departments has greatly improved the economic development within the agricultural community. In addition to that, we also have our CREP program, which is a partnership between federal and state. The county does the state portion. We are able to put buffers along our streams, buffers along our wetlands to protect them from that increased burden of sedimentation, as well as herbicides and pesticides. I look forward to the continued partnership between NRCS and LCD as we bring in more EQIP dollars and more CSP dollars, which could, ends up in tens of millions of dollars into the future for the Dunn County residents, Dunn County farming producers. So please, as you guys debate and as you guys go forward with your budget process, I know there's going to be tough decisions to be made, but look back at your plans. Look back at the strategic plan, the groundwater ad hoc plan, as well as the livestock siting plan. And please keep in mind that these plans cannot be completed without the staff at Land and Water Conservation Division. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Any other public comments? Okay. Our first item is we have no public hearing today. The first item is staff reports. Registered deeds. Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Paul Miller, County Manager. I do want to note today at your meeting, you have myself and Keith Stray, CFO, to assist in the discussion on the budgets. But I do have to depart at 10. I have another obligation. I just wanted you to be aware of that.
Okay, I didn't know that, Paul, but thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll keep that in mind. Let's see if we can get through this all in a timely fashion then. Heather, you want to give us any questions about Heather's report, or Heather, do you have any comments?
One question, Mr. Chairman, for Heather.
Sure. Supervisor Bureau.
Heather?
Yes.
On a normal year, if you have a surplus, is that carried over or does that go back into the general fund?
It goes to the general fund.
And does that happen more times than not?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Any further questions?
Yeah, Supervisor Kinnear here. I've got out my magnifying glass so I can see the things. Is this the time to ask about the budget for Heather too?
If you'd like to. Don't make it too complicated though. We'll get into it later.
Well,
But yeah,
Okay, I'll wait till later. I can wait till later.
okay. Any other questions? Let's move on then. Zoning department,
Actually be the survey division, Mr.
survey
Chair.
division, excuse me. Yeah, survey division. Yeah. Any questions? Land conservation? Any comments, Chase, or questions from the committee?
I'd like to ask a question of Chase.
Sure.
It's not really on the budget, but Chase, are you there?
Yep, I'm here, Supervisor Bureau.
Okay. At the last county board meeting, I think it was Supervisor Rogers asked how small of a parcel would still need a nutrient management plan. And I think he said 20 acres and you said, yeah, I mean, that would like need one. Is there any limit under a certain amount of acres that they wouldn't need one? According to state standards, or is that?
I'm sorry, Supervisor Burek, I don't remember that discussion as part of county board, there being an acreage thing, but I certainly could go back and look. The way it works with the state's rules, administrative code, and for our county ordinance would be anytime nutrients are applied to cropland or pasture land, it would need to follow a nutrient management plan. So that could be of any acreage and size.
Okay.
Now there is an animal unit threshold in there, and it's quite small. where you get to, 3 animal units per acre. So those individuals that may have like 1 or 2 horses on a small pasture may or may not be subject to that nutrient management requirement. But in general, any nutrients applied to cropland or pastureland must follow a nutrient management plan.
So how about a large garden? Would that need one, or if fertilizer was added to that? Because that's not cropland, that's for individual use, then that wouldn't be needed.
We would have to go back and look at each individual scenario and look at the circumstances that surrounded it. If it's depending on the scale of the garden and the amount of nutrients and the intensity of it, it may or may not be subject to it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, Chase, I have a question.
Okay, Jim.
Jim Seipel referred to the latest report in Lake Monoman that we had a reduction of phosphorus, but an increase of nitrogen. That kind of shocked me and took me back a little bit. Do you have any reaction to that, Chase?
I would agree with John's comments that the data and trend graphs that I've seen do indicate recent monitoring data where phosphorus is being reduced in Lake Monoman. However, nitrogen, particularly nitrate, is increasing. Nitrogen, nitrate being very mobile, much more mobile than actually phosphorus is. Phosphorus tends to be tied to soil or direct nutrient runoff, where nitrate is leachable, and the majority of the watershed is groundwater fed. So connections to groundwater and surface water are a given. So I am not, I guess I won't say I'm real surprised, but to see that the 2 lines are diverging, meaning that phosphorus is improving, but nitrogen is not, is a good sign that we are implementing some better practices in the watershed, but we still have plenty of work to do.
Thank you, Chase.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. I would note that as I noted to the committee, but I note also to in a little note, but take note that we have been in the process of hiring a new administrator for the zoning and planning administrator. That application process is still open. In the meantime, Bob Colson has begun on a contractual basis from Cedar Corp, serving as filling that role on a part-time basis. Bob is in the office Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday mornings. Okay. If there are no other questions, then we'll move on. The 8, either no items placed, items placed the request agenda. Economic development. Yeah, this is a discussion that we've been having between myself and the administration about the new position of planning and zoning, and looking at one of the options, depending upon how the process goes for the county funding or maintaining funding for the Economic Development Corporation, which is a separate entity from county government. Looking at the idea of, as we go through the process of hiring a new division administrator in planning and zoning, that we consider adding some element of economic development responsibility to their role. I don't know if Mr. Miller, do you have any comments you'd like to make on that? This is mostly for information purposes at this time.
Sure, just for informational purposes. The idea was spurred by the comment that the county needs to provide more leadership on economic development than perhaps it has in the past. The idea of a planning and zoning administrator also doing economic development is not uncommon. Economic development and planning have a lot of overlap, and there are many community development offices in units of local government across the United States which do planning, zoning, and economic development. What we are exploring is the possibility when we do get to interviews with the zoning administrator of including economic development as part of their scope of responsibilities, not to be the sole source of economic development by any means, because we have the Dunn County Economic Development Corporation, we have the Greater Menominee Development Corporation. What the zoning administrator in an economic development capacity could do, coordinate with those entities, coordinate with the local chambers of commerce, reach out to our major employers to establish firmer relationships between the county and those employers to get a handle on their plans for expansion or retention. All of those kinds of things would not require 100% of the zoning administrator's time at all. In fact, as I look at my own professional history, I was a planning and zoning director for many years. It is something that can be done once a week and be very effective in providing the leadership. That's what we're talking about, not being the sole source of economic development, but providing county-based leadership and helping us enforce the directional plan and its efforts to encourage and foster economic development. So that's what we're looking at doing.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Diane.
a question, if I may, for Mr. Miller. I mean, I'm not in principle opposed to this, but given the staffing situation in planning and zoning, this really seems to me like a huge stretch for that position. It already is overworked. So can you comment on that?
There is a vacancy in the staff position in addition to the zoning administrator, which is a zoning inspector / planner position. We may need to, I think we do need to give serious consideration to filling that position as well. Which will be dependent upon, obviously, everything else that has to be done, the multiple position requests we have as part of the overall county budget. But as I envision it in terms of our needs, if in fact economic development is a priority, and if in fact leadership by the county itself in economic development, or at least more strong participation, is a priority, then I think that prioritizes filling a zoning inspector position. That would free up the zoning administrator from most of the day-to-day activities of processing zoning permits, doing site visits, following up on complaints, and that sort of thing. And I think under that scenario, the new zoning administrator should have time. As I say, it shouldn't require more than 1 day a week, should have time to take up economic development responsibilities in addition to zoning administration and planning.
Mr. Chair,
Yes. Right.
this is Supervisor Kinnear. I kind of echo what Supervisor Morehouse said. I look in 2020, we had 6 positions. Now we're proposed down to 5. We still would have 2 unfilled, is my understanding, even if we put 1 in. So reducing a position and leaving 2 still unfilled and expecting to get all the work done, that doesn't make sense to me.
I left something out, Supervisor Kinnear, and I appreciate that you reminded me. Part and parcel of this proposal also entails moving sanitary permit applications out of the zoning office and into public health. So that whole element of what planning and zoning has done would be eliminated, allowing the division to focus on zoning, on planning, and economic development. I can also tell you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I recognize that, and we haven't really discussed that much in the committee, but I look over there too, and Diane has a better handle, but I see Keith Ferguson there all alone now. There's a position that hasn't been filled. So they're probably in the same boat we are. So that's a discussion down the road.
I have discussed this with KT Gallagher, our public health director, as well. She thinks that there is capacity within public health to take on sanitary permit administration as well, with the realistic, of course, stance of we would have to see how it goes, and it may entail, we may have enough resources, we may not, and we'd find out in the first year that we would try it. So it isn't something that we're simply assuming. I was going to add, if I was still in the planning and zoning field myself, I would not be daunted by what I've just presented. I think it is within the capacities of a sufficiently experienced and capable zoning administrator to do and oversee planning, zoning, and help with economic development. Primary duty is zoning. Secondary duties are planning. We often reach out to consultants on that. Tertiary duty would be economic development because we have other economic development organizations and the zoning administrator would work with them, not instead of them.
Well, thank you, Paul. Yeah, and one last comment. Go ahead after me, Jim. I just can't disagree more when you cut 2 complete positions out of the budget and then add something to it and expect it to be done. Even if you take something out. So you've got to convince me first, and you haven't yet.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I just wanted to echo that I agree with Supervisor Kinnear, and I think there are still a lot of data to be gathered on how feasible this is for the health department as well. So I'm not comfortable with this. We are really burdening our ENS staff. I'm concerned about that very much so.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. Well, this is a huge issue, and I think sometime before we make any changes, we ought to designate a time when we can thoroughly discuss this, because I'm one who has pretty strong feelings and convictions about this. So I'm just saying that's a good heads up, but I hope that we will have a time in the future when we can really discuss going from a 501c6 to a position right in the county. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, committee. Mr. Miller, do you have any final comments or?
If I may, just a question to Supervisor Anderson on your last comment. Were you under the impression that we were suggesting elimination of Dunn County EDC or any other organization in favor of the zoning administrator doing economic development? Because that's not the proposal.
Oh.
We're not talking about eliminating anything. In this scenario, we would be talking about adding something.
That's why we need more full discussion on this item so we fully understand it. Thank you.
Okay,
So I'm concerned also about having a complicated issue that is going to require discussion. I'm wondering, Paul, if you have thoughts about, or County Board Chair Bartlett have thoughts about how that discussion can go forward. I think it's clear the committee would like to have more discussion about it. We have probably one more meeting in August. And of course, the budget's not going to be finalized for a little while. So there's some discussion, but do you have any thoughts about how we go about resolving this?
so there's two parts to it. There's the consideration of whether or not the zoning administrator can or should do economic development activities in addition to other responsibilities. And then there's the consideration of the shift of the sanitary permit administration to the public health department. Only one of those has a budget implication. Whether or not the zoning administrator can do economic development is something that does not, in my opinion, entail any changes to the budget, the draft budget for fiscal year 22. Moving sanitary permit administration to the health department potentially does. If nothing else, it would involve the shift of one employee in the zoning department who does our sanitary inspections to the health department. But as we've talked it through with the health department, while KT Gallagher would become the supervisor, in terms of the intake of the permit requests, it would remain at the zoning office, who would then distribute the permit, the applications and complaints and inspections to the health department. Ms. Gallagher also identified there are more than one person in the public health department who either already have PALS training or can easily acquire it, which would increase the on-staff numbers of people available for inspection and administration purposes. With the caveat that, again, the administration of those provisions would need a year to see how it goes and may or may not entail a request for additional resources, either staff or otherwise, in order to effectively administer. But that shift is a budget thing. So my suggestion would be that this be included as an item on your next agenda. And I will reach out to KT Gallagher on our ability to pull something together and writing something from her that you can reference as part of your discussion at your next meeting.
Thank you. I think that would be helpful. We do need to have, it's clear from this discussion, we need to have a thoughtful and more informed discussion within the committee on this issue. So I appreciate your coming today and sharing your views of this.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask Mr. Miller a couple
Sure,
questions.
Jerry, go ahead. Go ahead.
And this here is not typically about the budget, but it's about the economic development. Why would a company want to come here or a company here expand if every place you go by has got a sign looking for employees? You know, so that's a major problem. And the other problem is on all our surveys we've done for our comprehensive growth, they all want to keep the rural characteristics of Dunn County. So where's that fine line about economic development and yet not becoming something like, you know, Western St. Croix County? Where's that fine line?
Yeah, and what drives any unit of local government's economic development efforts is exactly the priorities and the values of its elected officials. There are places that say we don't want any growth. There are places that say we like the way we are, no expansion, let's not do it. And in those places, they don't do much in the way of economic development because they don't want to, they don't need it. There are other places that look for as much growth as we can get. When it comes to rural areas, there are places that say we want to cover the ground with houses and roads and businesses, and as compared to some that have more nature that say we want to really restrict that, or they have other resources. They really don't want growth expanding and covering it. So it really is dependent on the values expressed by the unit of local government. Here in Dunn County, we face the challenge of economic development. That the first thing you mentioned, you know, people are looking for employees. that's a macro problem across the entire United States. Everybody's in that same boat. I think the real question on economic development is, do we continue to rely solely upon the efforts that have been made in the organizations that exist, or do we take a more proactive stance and do some of it, try to encourage some of it ourselves? That's really what we're talking about. And when it comes to that kind of leadership or more overt activity, again, it would be in partnership with, in cooperation with the other organizations that are involved. But it would have to focus on economic development. If we're talking new businesses or new growth, we'd have to focus on those areas that the communities within Dunn County have identified they want to see developed. They've earmarked it as residential, commercial, industrial, and that's where they want to see that kind of growth.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Supervisor Anderson.
Yes, good question, Supervisor Bjork. This is exactly why we need more discussion so that the supervisors and everything are aware of exactly the board made up right now of Dunn County Economic Development and how they come from all communities and serve and are watchful of the very same things you're concerned about, Supervisor Bjork. Excellent question.
Thank you. I would just note, Supervisor Bjork, that at some point we're going to get back to the discussion of our comprehensive land use plan, and that does include an effort to engage local communities in a discussion about what kind of future they want to have. It's a difficult thing to do, but we need to do it. And then two, I think, it was pointed out at the PR&D meeting yesterday that Dunn County has, by extension, folks, that Dunn County has one of the highest poverty rates in the state, and noted that perhaps the way to deal with that is economic development. And I think the point, and we can get into this as a discussion too, but the point is yes, economic development, but we have a lot of jobs that are not living wage jobs in Dunn County. A lot of people who are in poverty are working full time. And so we have to be aware of the ability to attract better quality jobs that are family supporting if possible. And as a county, one way we can shape those priorities is by our participation in the corporation, but also by the staff that we hire and the direction we give them. So anyway, any other comments? Okay, good discussion. We'll continue it. Now we're on to 8A, 2020 legislative agenda. I think I sent you all a suggestion for our discussion on this. What I did, and Tom's got it up there now, what I did is I took the part of the agenda that is related to PR&D, basically the land use environmental part or agricultural part. And some of these are the recommendations from last year. But when you look at it, you notice that some of them deal with are maybe issues we want to see. Do we really want to include that again this year? Or in some cases, they are issues that are more related to the fact that we were operating a recycling center and we're not any longer. So we do want to continue those. And then there's a couple of possible additions too. So these I think are all of the ones that we had on there. And if for efficiency's sake, I'm sensitive to Mr. Miller having to, I just thought of that. Maybe actually as I think about it now, without objection, would the committee be okay with moving this item to the end of the agenda? I don't think we'll have a lot of discussion on it, but just in case we do. Any objection to that? Okay. Then we'll move on to the fun stuff. Discussion and recommendation for the 2022 ROD draft budget, Register of Deeds. I think if we could get this up to a level where people with somewhat normal eyesight could see it, that'd be great. Heather, do you want to, could you kind of lead us through this a little bit and identify any things you want us to take note of?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I guess overall, Tom, if you want to scroll down to the very bottom, there you go. Thank you. I guess overall, you can see that the increase to the budget for 2022 is 5.4%. And that total increase is actually less than the percentage of increase in the salary and wages. I don't know if you want to scroll back up, Tom. So that's, briefly, I mean, that's kind of where we're at as far as the total. The revenues, I mean, are the revenue projections are mainly dependent, on the housing market. I mean, we do have some revenue from the vital statistics, the copy fees from the vital statistics, but largely we're dependent on the real estate market. 2020 was an excellent year. 2021 is holding strong, and trying to predict what 2022 does in real estate is up in the air. So that's where I'm at with that. I've increased, the revenues slightly there. But any other increases as far as expenses is in the IT related costs, and the IT department provides us with a breakdown of those costs. And so you'll see some increases in software maintenance, Microsoft Office and Google applications, telephone expenses. But again, overall, the increase is 5.47%, and that is less than the increase to salary and wages. And each year the guideline is to maintain a 0% increase for all expenditures except salary and benefits.
Okay, any questions?
Supervisor Kinnear here, sir.
Yes. Right.
Okay, thank you, Heather. That looks good. Just a question so I understand better. The very first line, taxes, general property, and it says used to balance budget. Does that mean that when the budget is at the end of the year, that then you finally know how much of the money is going to come from our levy?
Exactly. It kind of just depends on the revenues, how much levy I use. It changed a few years ago. I don't know if you remember when more of the IT costs were rolled into the department budgets. And at that point, then I did need levy dollars to balance my budget so it basically balances it to zero. And you're right, at the end of the year, we just see where we're at to see if we use any levy dollars at all. I think in 2019, we used a few dollars, maybe like 3,000, but 18 and 20, we didn't use any levy dollars. I guess I haven't gone back, farther than that, but does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. So this is your estimate of, it's about 10 grand that you might have to use to balance the budget. Could be more, could be less. But I imagine it's a conservative estimate, so it's probably not going to be much more.
It's a 10 grand increase from 2021, but potentially we could be using the full $52,461 if we don't meet our revenue projections.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, now I've got it. Thank you.
Supervisor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Heather. Good report. One of the things that jumped out at me, and I suspect we're going to see this in every report, is the increase in health insurance, which we have no control over. And that percentage, as you're scrolling down again, I think was 12, 13% or something on health insurance. Where did I see that earlier? A huge jump. health insurance expense, thank you, almost 14%. This is something we're going to be faced with on all of our budgets, I assume, in the future. No fault of ours, nothing we can really do about it. How did you come up with this projection at this point, Heather, that we think that'll be the increase in health insurance?
So all of the numbers from salary and wages through, all the personnel expenses, that's all provided to us by the HR department. So it really isn't any projections on my end. I don't know if Keith could better answer, or Paul.
Well, it doesn't matter. I've just jumped out at me, and I'm just saying that's something we are going to be faced with. Thank you for this good report, Heather.
Mr. Chair, I can answer that because that will impact a large number of the budgets.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Yes, in ROD budget, it does equate to just short of 14% increase reflected. Now, every year, Human Resources and Finance work together. We do a census of where current employees are at with their health insurance, and we project that forward into the next year. And that's what happened. There was a budgeted increase. The initial budget, I believe, was a 10% increase. Now, health insurance and dental insurance are out for bid right now, and there will be a proposal for a renewal that will finalize this further. But yeah, to start, we did budgeted increase based on trends, based on actual claims. I know Committee on Administration has heard this report before. The last couple of years, our claims history has been very high. So it, just unfortunately a lot of sick people or a lot of medical claims. So this is reflective of where things are at today, but things can change. We hope to have proposals before Committee on Administration later this month or next month to be able to refine that number, hopefully bring it down some.
Thank you. Appreciate the answer.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Diane.
Heather, I don't know how to read these line numbers, contractual consulting services, the Fiddler. Can you explain that increase? It's an 11% increase, and this is probably a stupid question. It's probably just what the fee is.
Yeah, no, not stupid at all. Let's see how to best explain. Okay, so our online agreements with our customers, so remote online users pay a subscription each month. And in turn, we have to pay our software company licensing fees based on that usage. So this 20,000, yeah, is an increase from 18 to 20,000. I feel obviously with COVID and everything, there's more online usage, so that number has increased. It's kind of reflected differently over the past few years because we do, in turn, our software vendor maintains a public facing site for us, and we get fees. We get fees from them for that public facing site. So it's kind of a swap of we're paying in our licensing fees. They're in turn giving us a portion of the public facing service fees. And before I kind of reflected that as offsetting, where now it's reflected in the budget that this is the full amount that we're paying for licensing fees. And then you'll see in the revenue that has increased under the miscellaneous fees, that I'm also reflecting the revenue from the public facing site. If that
okay, and
it's kind of a swap of money, but I'm showing this different now in 2021 or 2021 and 2022.
okay, so it's user dependent, and that the swap is reflected in revenues.
Yes, so up in the miscellaneous fees,
Show us.
Yep, we'll show the revenue received from the public facing site. So yeah, yep. And then again, the copy contract revenue is the revenue that we receive from those online access contracts. So we're seeing the revenue there with the online access plus the Tapestry share, which is the public facing site from our software vendor, those fees that come back to us. On the expense side, I'm showing the portion that we need to pay in for those subscriptions, the online access contracts, basically.
Perfect. Thank you for that explanation. Very helpful.
Mhm.
Heather, just briefly, while we're on the revenue section, are there any of these fees that we have the ability to increase to help sort of cover the costs of the services you're providing, in your opinion?
So back to the online access contracts, those we do have the ability to increase our fees. In 2019, there was a fee increase to our customers. And I keep a close eye on that to monitor that as far as our, the software maintenance and so forth, that we're covering those fees. So I feel good about those numbers. When you get into the vital statistics, recording fees and the transfer fees, those are all statutory fees.
Okay.
So that I don't have control, we don't have control over changing those. It's a matter of how many documents we record a year, how many real estate sales, because we get a share of, they have to pay a transfer tax for every sale, and we get a share of that transfer fee. So it's, again, it's dependent on the real estate market. Interest rates are low. That's good. We'll see a lot of refinances. We'll see mortgage documents recorded. We'll see satisfaction documents. And then, of course, when sales are doing well, then we get that share, that 20% share of the transfer fee. But the vital statistics recording fees those are statutory fees. So it's just dependent on the quantity, I guess. And the transfer fee is based on the sales.
Thank you. That's helpful. Any other questions? Would anyone, so we have one more meeting this month. We're tasked with providing a proposed budget to executive for their September meeting, which means we possibly could modify budgets at this or the next meeting. But would anyone, it seems like I would say it seems like there are somewhat limited options that we have with regard to this budget, as small as it is and as well-defined as it is. Would anyone want to, would people want to defer action on this till the next meeting, or would anyone want to suggest a motion to approve or modify the budget at this point in time? Well, don't all rush.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I was going to look for a small way to slash in that $20,000 11% increase, but it doesn't seem like we have much room here. So I don't know if we're ready, but I would, and I don't know if I'll have a second, but I would move approval of the proposed 2022 Register of Deeds budget.
And I'll
Okay.
second that.
All right. Mr. Anderson seconds. Any further discussion? So all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say no. Okay, we again still can possibly review this if there are any earth-shaking insight. It doesn't seem like that's going to happen. Okay, thanks, Heather, very much for putting that together for us. So now we move on to environmental services, and maybe Tom, you want to talk about this chart?
Sure. So this is the ENS organizational chart. And then this is the, hang on, there was a proposed, oh, it's just off the screen. So this is what's being proposed for 2022. So any questions on this chart? I was also asked to put together this basically the same chart with employees' names in those positions, and you all would have received this last week. So just our proposed organizational chart for 2022. Who occupies the positions, what positions are unfunded or vacant. So any questions on the org chart?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
thank you for putting this together, Tom. It really helps. I'm wondering where Michelle would fit in this spot.
Yeah, I thought that too.
Well, under what's being proposed, her position would be moving under public health. So their org chart should be reflective of that position.
So just so I understand this now, as I see this chart here, there would be 5 positions there, not necessarily filled or funded, but there's 5 positions there. Is that correct?
Under planning and land use control, is that your question?
Right, yes.
Well, we have a zoning and planning zoning administrator, the senior planner's unfunded. We have 1 zoning enforcement officer. So 1, 2, 3, there would be 4 positions as I'm seeing it.
Yeah, okay, 4 plus the zoning specialist. Yeah. Oh, okay. Then if I look back in 2020, I think we just zoomed by it a little bit ago. Weren't there 5 plus the zoning specialist?
Mike, maybe I'm confused, but I see a zoning administrator, 1 zoning enforcement officer planner, and 1 zoning specialist. That adds up to 3. Not 4. Just
Yeah,
one.
I see the administrator, planner, zoning enforcement officer, planner, zoning enforcement officer,
Senior
and then
planner,
zoning specialist.
the senior planner is going to be vacant and unfunded.
Right, but I'm talking about positions that are there, maybe not funded, maybe not, maybe they might be vacant. These are positions that might be filled someday.
Gotcha.
Okay, so there's 5 right now, and I'm looking back in 2020, there were 6. So basically, we're eliminating 1 of these positions. I'm not sure which one. There were 2 zoning enforcement officer planners. I just want to get a feel for this. You know, we're not filling things, but we're also eliminating a position, funded or unfunded, doesn't matter. We're eliminating an actual position.
If I may, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I may be missing it as well, Supervisor Kinnear. I don't believe we're eliminating any positions. 1 position is being, on this org chart, which is proposed, is being shifted. The position currently held by Michelle is being shifted to public health, not eliminated.
Okay, eliminated from our environmental services department.
Yes, there's a change that removes that one. As I said earlier, the proposal is to have an administrator, a zoning enforcement officer, and a zoning specialist. So that would leave the senior planner vacant and a planner zoning enforcement officer position vacant. It's 2 of 5.
Yes, yeah. Okay, I got that. My point is, yes, the position has been moved. We're not eliminating a person. I'm looking at our planning and land use control division, and we are eliminating a position on our organization chart, whether it's being moved or eliminated or whatever it's going.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, this is Chase.
Yeah.
If I could just comment on the org chart too, there isn't a proposed elimination of a vacant position for the land and water division comparing 2021 to 2022. So in the past, we had 6 conservation planners, and now we're going down to 5.
You had 6 positions, one unfilled. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And now you're staying with, you're continuing to have 5. Okay.
Correct.
Any other questions about this chart? So this format assumes that the change in shifting of the enforcement, the sanitary enforcement, Michelle's position essentially would shift to public health. But the position, for our discussion purposes, that position stays on the org chart. All right, any other questions?
If we wish to make a change in this chart before we pass it on, how or when will we do that?
We would do that at the next meeting. Or, I mean, I think technically, Ed, we want to, I think that we should try to clarify that situation by the end of our next meeting. It can always change after that, depending upon the will of the executive committee and the board. But from our perspective, it would be good to have clarity about what we are going forward with by our next meeting.
Thank you, Tom. And just as a heads up, so there's no shock or anything, I'm looking at the E&S director, the vacant and unfunded position, and I see that as unnecessary. And one of the things I would ask in the future then as a discussion as to eliminate that position.
That, I think we could put that on the agenda for the next meeting, Mike. That would be appropriate.
If I may, Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
just for consideration in the light of what Supervisor Kinnear just suggested, eliminating it from the organizational chart means that should a future iteration of this committee or the county board decide to put it, they've got to go through the whole process again to establish it. Whereas leaving it unfunded, vacant and unfunded, retains that option without obligating anything as far as the organization is concerned in the future.
That
Okay.
will be our discussion, I hope.
Yes.
Yeah. So we will, that's well taken, Mr. Miller, and we'll have that as a discussion item at our next committee meeting. Anything else on this chart?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
as far as employees are going, I see that the survey division and land and water look real good, but the planning and land use is looking at total disarray of like lack of employees. You look at the chart and there's no, hardly any names there. So, I mean, that should be like a high priority to try to get those, people's names in there and get that
Yeah, no,
fully staffed.
right. And that's what actually I noted in the beginning of the meeting. I think that's a really important, it's really troubling to see that we're sort of hanging on by our fingernails in this division. Unfortunately, it's not much we could do about it that with the fairly short notice of an employee leaving us. So we are moving forward with trying to fill that position. We can't do it any faster than we can find a good person because we don't want to hire the wrong person. And I think the other questions we really need to decide. And I think Mr. Miller would agree. In the next, we need to move forward.
But didn't we hire like a limited term employee in this just lately? Or is that in a different division? I thought that was in planning and zoning, or am I mistaken?
That's a good question.
You are
Mr.
correct.
Miller, can you address that?
Can you repeat I'm not quite sure I followed the question.
The question was, I thought that we just offered a job to a limited term employee, and I thought it was
Yes.
and zoning, but my memory's getting bad too.
No, we did in fact, to provide assistance during Michelle's leave of absence, we did hire a
Okay.
limited term zoning inspector who will work with us, I believe, until the 1st of November or October. Don't quote me, but will work for us during that interim.
Okay. Thank you. But would that be a person that maybe would have a possibility of staying on, like once Michelle goes into a different, to the health department?
Unfortunately, no, the individual who was qualified is only willing to work until that time.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other last questions? Will be coming.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Bartlett.
yes, getting back to Chase's comment on the conservation planner, that he said there was 6 positions last year and we're going down to 5. Isn't this the position that we had 6, but one was vacant and had been vacant for a while, but it was still funded? And then one of the other positions were funded by a grant, so that budget-wise, it's going to end up being the same as last year, budget-wise, funding the same amount, even though we're going down one?
That is correct, Chairman Bartlett. I guess for the purpose of my comment for this conversation was regarding the organization chart and which positions were being eliminated. And there is a vacant funded position for 2021 that's being proposed to be eliminated for 2022. However, when we continue our budget discussion here up ahead, that there is impacts where that you are correct that the budget does not change based on that, other than that vacant position that has been on the books for a couple of years and not filled will no longer be an option.
Right, so actually our budget is gonna take a hit of one position in reality, because one position was funded by grant and the other one was open. Thank you.
Correct. Yep. Thank you.
Okay. There's very little left of this chart that we haven't pretty well ripped up. So let's go forward onto the budget discussion. Does staff want to lead us through these as their section comes up? So,
Mr. Chair, yes, I think that'd be a great idea. And I can take off here as we start the revenue sections. The surveyor's office is at the top of the chart. So let me expand or blow this up. Everybody see this okay? Okay, so this is the revenue section for ENS. This is land division revenue. Before I go any further, I just need to make this very clear to the committee that the figures I have put together here are based on our updated fee schedule that this committee approved several months ago now. That fee schedule, however, is not going to be adopted until our new land division ordinance takes place. So just want to express urgency of getting this new ordinance in place by January 1. If our new ordinance is not in place by January 1, then these figures are not going to be accurate. So just want to drive that point home. We really need to get working on this draft land division ordinance, if nothing else for budget purposes for next year. So I'm anticipating, based on the increase to our fee schedule, about a 32% increase in land division revenue. 32% sounds like a lot of money, but we're dealing with fairly small numbers here, going from about 14,000 up to just over 18,000. At the time these numbers were pulled together, this was several months ago, and now I have a better handle on land divisions coming in. I guess I'm pleasantly surprised that as of today, we've had 60 certified survey maps submitted for review. Last year at this time, for perspective, we only had 31 as of this date. So we're basically double. We did 71 total last year. Our 5-year average is 65. So we're already, might as well say we're at our 5-year average on the 1st of August. So if we take the 41 CSMs that were done last year from this point till the end of the year and add them on, I'm projecting roughly 100 certified survey maps coming in this year, which is about 35 more than our 5-year average. Projecting revenue can be very tricky, and I'll admit it's tough. But based on these numbers, provided this year is not, one of those anomalies, if we expect the same type of activity next year, this number I have on here we may want to consider adjusting that. Right now I've got 65 CSMs, which is the 5-year average. That's what I was projecting for next year. But again, based on this year, that number may be a little on the light side. So I will open that up right now for discussion. I feel we should increase that slightly. Pushing it up to 100 though, I think is maybe an unrealistic expectation, but maybe adding another 10 to that. Committee have any thoughts on this?
Can't you just change the average, Tom, by adding this year to it and see what it is? It's probably 70 something.
Yeah, you're correct. I mean, we're all trying to find additional revenue sources and make accurate projections. And by not bringing this up, I would just, I guess, feel rotten walking out of here, not giving you all the information to make a good informed decision. So,
Would you feel comfortable making that? I know you said 40 or 50, or I can't forget what you said, but it seems like our average seems to be more in the area of 60 or 70 at least.
More like 70.
More like 70. Yeah. Does that seem like a number you would feel comfortable putting in there?
I would say either 70 or 75.
Well, let's say 75 then.
So I mean, if we bump that up by 10, we're looking at additional $2,500 in revenue. I know it's not a lot, but every dollar helps. But I don't want to be unrealistic either. And my fear is this year is just an anomaly. I don't know. I'm actually quite surprised by the numbers we're seeing, and perhaps it will continue next year. I'm not sure. The downside is if it is an anomaly and then we don't pull this money in next year, that affects our budget negatively. So again, projections are very difficult, but these numbers, I think, warrant some discussion.
Okay. Do you want to, it's been suggested that we say 70 or 75. Are you comfortable with that? 75? Yes. Okay. Then let's. I don't think we need a motion on every single shift like this. Let's just note that that's the recommendation that unless there's an objection from the committee, let's note that that's an adjustment that we support. And you can move on then, Tom.
Okay, I'm going to just run these numbers for Keith because I believe Keith is listening and will be making any adjustments to the budget. So if we change the 65 to 75 at 250 per CSM, that gets us 18,750, and then another 40 lots at $20 per lot, which is another 800. So if we add 800 plus 18,750, should be 19,550. So the 17,050 should be changed to 19,550 if you're listening, Keith. And then we're projecting 75 at 250. Projected plat revenue, we're going to leave that alone. If you have questions,
if I could make a suggestion here on technical changes like this, if they could be noted in the minutes or just presented offline, so we're not taking committee time to run calculations and do that, that'd be helpful, I believe.
I think that's a good suggestion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
so this is another dumb question, but does that then, this small amount that we've added in revenue, does that reduce by a similar amount, the amount of levy?
That is correct.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Yay, we saved a little money.
Okay, moving on in the interest of time, charges to the highway department. So this is work we do at the direction of the highway department and then bill them for that work. John Swarsky and I met on this and we just feel that 3,000, every year projects change. And we just feel that we needed to reduce this slightly. So I have $2,500 in there. Again, it's a projection. Any questions on that?
You reduce that because that's sort of a more accurate estimate.
Correct.
Based on- Okay.
Correct.
Right.
We looked at the anticipated projects they have next year, compared it with what we did or what we're doing this year, and we're trying to make a projection based on volume of work that they may have. And projects change all the time, so it's a tough moving target.
Okay.
So we feel it's based on the best information we have at this time. Duplicating, this is a very small amount of money we basically get from copies of records. And now that most of our records are online, people can access those. I dropped that down to about $40. And again,
Okay.
it's very tough.
That's good.
We're talking small amounts of money
Yep.
here, but it better reflect. And then I will turn this over to Chase at this point, because the rest of this revenue that we're seeing here is from his office.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So just, I guess I'll go into as much detail as you'd like to as you look through this, but just looking at some of the changes in our revenue to speak of. The first one were local reimbursement of 15,000 last year to nothing this year. That was based on a contribution from the city of Menominee that they contributed to our department, and that has ceased, and technically it is not in place for I think the current year as well. So that's where that change came from. Additionally, the multi-discharge variance, the next line item below, that is a reduction based on the amount of funds we are anticipated to receive within the Red Cedar River watershed. And this is basically money in, money out type of a project. So you have a revenue line item here, but we'll also have an expense line item. I am anticipating potential huge changes since these numbers were pulled together for this program, but those are yet to be finalized and would not be responsible to try to include them at this time. Stormwater plan review fees, tree planting revenue, or excuse me, the stormwater plan review fees, those are reflective of the updated fee schedule that was adopted by all of you recently, and based on the amount of work that we would put in for that. The other revenue line items here seem to be the same compared to what was budgeted last year. If there's anything particular that you'd like to discuss, I'd be happy to do that. And then the sale of our 2006 Durango is projected to take place next year upon the approval of its replacement through this budget process. And in doing so, we are anticipating a slight increase compared to the sale of a vehicle that we replaced in the current budget cycle. So any questions on that set of revenue? We have a number of other.
Chase,
Go ahead, Mike.
so the general property taxes would go up by 67,000 approximately.
Correct, and that we have a number of grants that I didn't get to yet. Those are later on that help support staff funding. And while we have estimated those numbers, we are still awaiting a final allocation for that for 2022, which may impact that levy as well. Hopefully in a positive way based on the state budget.
Tracy, are you going to talk about those today, or?
I believe they're included as part of the budget later on.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Okay. Any
I have a-
questions? Any further questions?
Yes.
Dave
I have a
Bartlett.
question. The 15,000 from other local reimbursement, is that for the water specialist? Was that part of that?
Well, I'm not certain as to the details of where it started. I believe that was part of the reason for their contribution, but when it comes to the budget and where the money came from, it was designated as a revenue source for the department and not specifically to a position.
But I guess what I'm getting at is, excuse me, you're proposing that that position was funded by a grant fund, and part of that money came from, I can't remember if it was the city or the Cedar Lake.
It was a city.
That's what I thought it was, the city. And so anyway, it was partially funded grant, and then the county and the city took up it, and your proposal is to keep that position. I realize that the grant funding is going away, but the city funding going away just because we haven't asked for it, or they've decided that seeing the grant funding went away, that they should not contribute, or do they feel that we don't need that position anymore and that's why they don't want to contribute?
My understanding is that the funding of the 15,000 is they've chosen to not contribute. It's not that they don't support our work. The intent of that money was for us to do some work for the city in the past, and now the city has staff capacity to do that. Currently, that revenue is not considered a grant. It has not gone to support a specific person within our budget. Therefore, that water resource specialist is fully funded through our county budget process. However, the revenue that the department is receiving of that 15,000 is no longer the case. So, yes, in a way, it is tied to, at one point in time, to that water resource specialist position, but that is not how it's reflected in our budgeting process. It is not a grant for that position anymore.
So that you mentioned that they have someone that's going to be doing part of the work that that position was doing then for the city.
Again, I apologize for not knowing the full history on some of these things, and not this being my first budget process. I am not aware of our department doing work for them at this current time. We are not doing that. We haven't for some time. And it's my understanding when I communicated with the city that that was part of the reason that this was established years ago. But there is not that activity currently or in the future.
I think if I can,
Thank you.
if I can, the water quality specialist position was, I'm not sure the date that it was established, but a number of years ago, 7-8 years ago, probably. And at the time, it was because the county had made a priority issue of clean water quality. And it was felt that expanding and improving the resources provided by the conservation department was the best way to accomplish that. At the time, that obviously adding a new position was a cost increase. So at the time, to show their support, the city agreed to provide a annual payment to the department, to the county, to help support that position. The county also took on additional budget expenses to support that position. And that idea was that position would focus on not on doing work specifically for Menominee, but doing the broader work of improving awareness and participation in groundwater quality programs throughout the county. So it was a collaborative effort back then. I don't know why they have decided to not fund it, but that's why they decided to fund it in the beginning.
Thank you.
Go on, Chase.
I guess we were at a point here, if there's any other questions with that revenue line items there, otherwise we can proceed.
Any other questions? Okay, let's go on.
Okay, planning and zoning, their information is at the bottom here, and I don't know how helpful I'm going to be in answering any questions, but here are the numbers. So there's revenue from zoning permits and fees, and then also sanitation permits and fees, and it looks like those revenues are projected to be down for 2022. And these are numbers that, of course, Bob would have submitted as part of the budget. Any questions on revenue for zoning and sanitation?
Yeah, I have a question, Tom. If a position was moved to the health department, does that involve a change in where the fees go, which department, or what is this one considering?
If I may, Mr. Chair, the anticipation would be if the administration of sanitary is moved to public health, then the revenue would be moved to public health.
Thank you. But it's not here yet,
No,
or is it?
no, we're still showing, as you can see on the revenue line item, expected revenue from sanitary permit administration.
And I would note that the committee has has expressed an interest in increasing fees if necessary to more closely meet or exactly meet the cost of providing services. So I would expect that we would be doing that, or considering that anyway, and that these numbers would go up.
Do we expect, if I may, Mr. Chair, do we expect that will happen before this budget is adopted? I kind of doubt that. In which case we should budget conservatively, and we can adjust fees at any time.
Well, that may be. It all depends on how soon we fill that position, I guess.
Yes.
Any other, go on, Tom.
So, I mean, these are the bottom dollar amounts to your total revenue for ENS. So overall, it looks like there's about just shy of a 7% increase in revenue. And if there's no other questions, that concludes the revenue portion for ENS. We can move on to expenditures.
Just one question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I hate to lose, positions, but if the sanitary permit fees are almost covering the employees' wages, why would we want to lose that, position? I know it's been discussed before, but, I just hate to lose, like in this department, to shrink it down to almost nothing.
Again, Supervisor Bjork, the position isn't being lost. It's under discussion to be transferred.
Right.
To public health.
Right. But I just like to, like you said, I hate to see the planning and zoning just go down to nothing when that employee is almost being paid by the fees. So it's not really costing that division that much. I know it's not being eliminated. I just have been always of the concept that you don't want to get smaller. You at least want to stay the same.
We will discuss it more coming up here. Pardon me, my phone is going off. We will discuss it more at the next meeting, but the proposed shift of the sanitary permit administration to the health department is actually intended to improve the service to Dunn County residents by making more resources available when it comes to sanitary permit administration and inspection than we currently have. As it is right now, our single sanitary permit inspector is the only one we have to do those. We have to outsource to a professional company, Cedar to fill in the gaps. Under the proposal, we may be able to do more of it in-house. So I would encourage this committee not to think about that potential shift as a loss of anything, but rather as an improvement in service that we are considering. With that having been said, Mr. Chair, as I indicated, I myself need to run. I think the discussion on the expenditures portion of the budget for E&S is one that I would beg your indulgence to be able to be part of, in which case perhaps the chair and the committee want to consider concluding the E&S review and picking it up at your meeting later this month.
Well, I think we'll follow that in the spirit of that, Paul, by continuing to review it. But we will take it up again when you're able to join us in our next meeting.
I apologize for having to depart at this time, but a relatively important meeting I've got to attend. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Okay. Tom Carlson.
Sure. If there's no other questions on the revenue side, we'll move into the expenditures. So I'm going to start out by saying similar to Heather that, you know, every year we've been instructed to come in with a 0% increase on non-salary and fringe items. So if you look at everything basically above the yellow here, these are items that are out of my control. They are provided to us in a spreadsheet by human resources, and they actually populate these numbers. So we were focused on health insurance before in Heather's budget. If we look at mine, 12% increase. Life insurance, 19%. But if you look at it, it's only a small increase there, $59. So again, those are items I don't have any control over. Any questions on this first section of salary and fringe? If not, I'll move on to the items that I do have control over. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on these unless there's questions. But again, all of these items you're going to see below are either at 0% increase or negative amounts. So the first one is maintenance contracts, and these numbers are given to us by IT. I really don't have much control, if any control over those numbers, but there's a small increase in the maintenance contracts. Telephone is a small increase. Cell phone, I dropped that down. Again, we're talking small numbers here. It's a 60% decrease, but.
Tom, may I interrupt?
Yes.
I looked at the cell phone number and said, what? How do you get?
So
this is pretty cheap.
This is my understanding. Our bill every month is about just over $1. Sometimes it's less than $1. And the way I understand it is years ago, the county purchased a whole bunch of cell phones and got them all on a group plan. And because we purchased in bulk, the bill was split up. We got a really good deal. So this cell phone that I'm referring to and budgeting for is a work cell phone that is left in our survey truck. And Troy and Greg use it periodically when they need to contact landowners in the field, just so that they aren't using their personal cell phone. And again, the charge for that it's very minimal. And we've been budgeting $5 a month for 12 months, and it's way more than we need. So I dropped it down from 5 to 2. Again, we're basically talking chump change here, but
right.
I wanted to at least present accurate numbers for the committee. So 60% decrease in our cell phone. There you have it. Internet access, about a 28% decrease. 41% decrease on the maintenance of the motor vehicle. So this is directly related to our new vehicle purchase. Actually called a few dealers and got prices on the 2 things it's going to need next year, because it'll obviously be under warranty for 3 years. So the only thing it should need next year are oil changes and tire rotations. And when we figure out how many of those we need to do a year, $175 will adequately cover that, which is a decrease from $300. Any questions on that? some big decreases here, but we're talking very small numbers, so don't let that fool you. Purchasing rolls of paper and ink cartridges, I dropped that down, kind of looked at our average over the last couple of years, and believe $260 will cover that. It's right in the ballpark. So again, a modest decrease. Membership dues are remaining unchanged. Meal reimbursement when we're traveling unchanged. Program related travel, we haven't put any money in there for a few years. Conferences, seminars unchanged. Gasoline is unchanged. Gasoline is always a tricky one. I took our average for the last 4 years and it's coming out just shy of $1,200. But we have to keep in perspective that was for a much smaller vehicle. We've moved into a full size now, so the gas mileage won't be quite as good as we're seeing. So I think $1,500 is certainly in the ballpark. No reason to, certainly wouldn't decrease it. And I guess we'll see how next year goes. We may have to increase it in 2023, switching to a larger vehicle. Operating supplies, 0% increase. And then IT equipment. This is basically a number that's reflective, if you will, of an escrow account. Our IT department looks at the cost of replacement of all our computer technology and then figures out what the cost would be divided by a roughly 5-year life expectancy of it. And that number was given to me by IT, and that number is populated in here. So really, again, out of my control. But so again, everything in here is at a 0% increase. I'm asking for no increases on any of these operating items, and a lot of them are showing decreases. So any questions? This would be the operating expenses for survey.
Tom, it's Mike. I'm just glad to see that you continue to do the professional development and put that in your budget. I think that's a really important part. It's a small amount, but it's really important. Dues, all those kind of things, morale, professionalism, everything. So I'm glad to see you include that.
And we always get a good report, which is also interesting.
Any other questions on the revenue side? If not, we'll move on. Okay, hearing none. I will move down into land and water conservation, turn it over to Chase.
All right, thanks, Tom. So regarding the changes in attendance hours there, looking at our staff. So we have staff that are levy funded, and some of the changes in expenses for that line item are related to the wage and grade compensation that we don't have control over. That's just where they are on their steps. The other portion of this would be based on our grants and changes to our position layout. Looking at regarding the soil health specialist position, that position itself, based on the calculations we pulled together for the budget at this time, looked at no increase in expense related to elimination of that vacant position, and in consideration of the levy dollars already funding a portion of that position, which was around $10,000. So that position itself, in the way the numbers calculate out, is budget neutral. So this increase here in this line item is mainly due to the wage and fringe changes, as well as the other thing that we can talk about is our state grant. So we pulled these numbers together based on an anticipation of the state grant staying the same. And as a result of that, the makeup of our staff and those increases would basically put more burden on the levy, because our state grant would not keep up with basically the cost of living or changes in staff. So with that said, our state allocation for that grant is expected to change to the preliminary allocation plan that's rolled out right now. But again, it would not be responsible at this time to try to calculate that in without a final allocation plan. Other items here, you can see the health insurance and other fringes, very similar to Tom and Heather's explanation. And those are numbers that are given to us by Human Resources. Any questions on that before I move on to our stuff I have somewhat more control over?
Chase, your comment about the state grant. I know you can't put that in there until those numbers are determined, but on what basis do you think there is likely to be an increase in that state grant?
I'm expecting about a $28,000 impact to us. So we would receive additional $28,000, which would offset our levy needs by $28,000.
Okay.
I guess moving on, looking at that accounting and auditing services, that single audit was highlighted in yellow there. That is just some numbers that I guess confirmed with Keith to include in the budget still. And maybe he can provide more context as to what that is. But beyond that, I tried to go through so I could educate myself on our budget over the past few years, tried to look at averages of expenses and looked at where we can reduce areas. And you'll see that reflected here. Some of the maintenance contracts, those are numbers that are based on subscriptions and other IT provided services. And that number is given to us by IT. Permit fees. So these are fees that are paid to Wisconsin DNR. This is an expense that when permit holders for our non-metallic mining reclamation program, that is a state mandated program, and a portion of the fees collected by those operators is required to be paid to the Department of Natural Resources. And this number is reduced. And that is due to the averaging of where we have been in the past few years, as well as where we're expected to be based on the size of mine sites and the percentage of that fee that needs to be paid to DNR. You will see on the next line item is telephone. That's an IT provided dollar amount. So you'll see that decrease. But then the next one would be a cell phone. There is a large increase there, and that is due to our proposal to include a new cell phone within the department. Currently, we have one operating work cell phone. It is a flip style phone that basically can take calls and receive calls and make calls. Currently, we have two digital cameras that we use for work, but as you're all aware, with today's technology and communication, especially with contractors, their communicating style is through cell phone and texting. And we are requesting to include a cell phone within our department that would be a smartphone type, which therefore the cost is more. But it would help provide a better resource for staff when they're in the field and eliminate their use of personal cell phones by one. It is not encouraged to use personal cell phones at this time, but in some cases it's necessary. And we try to make sure that that's limited. So for via public records requests and other concerns like that. Be happy to answer any other thoughts you have on that. Otherwise, we can continue on, Tom. Internet access, again, a number provided to us by IT. And next page, please. So repairs for motor vehicles. Just a point here on that line item. Our gasoline is included as a part of this expense and has not been separated out, as Tom alluded to in his budget discussion. So all of our maintenance fees and gasoline and operating expenses for our vehicles are included in that line item. The next line item for other repair and maintenance of office stuff. This is just more hand type equipment. I've looked at averages over the last several years and felt it was necessary to reduce that expense. The next one is our Knights Creek PL 566 flood control structures. Again, our average for this line item is less than 10,000. However, based on recent inspections by our partner agencies on those structures, we are anticipating some expense needed for those structures, and I felt it was necessary to leave that where it's at for the time being, knowing that if we don't have to complete those repairs, then we will not have that expense. The other line item stays the same here for other equipment repairs. I would look at this multi-discharger variance. So I mentioned that earlier in the revenue. Here's where you see that reflected in the expense line item. So a reduction there. Printing duplication stays the same. Other small items. So we are currently operating 8 groundwater monitoring wells in the county, and a number of part of this line item be the small items of equipment, and that line item is expected to be reduced based on our average spending over the last several years. Looking at membership dues, so our Wisconsin Land and Water Conservation Association is a huge player in advocating for us at the state level to support our staffing dollars and grants. So this line item reflects that membership, as well as membership in other associations or area associations. So one of those being National Association of Conservation Districts. That we have opportunities for grants from them from time to time. So being a member is beneficial to us, but you'll see a decrease in that line item based on average spending the last few years. Other decreases or changes would be under travel and meals, just looking at average spending, and that was reduced as well. Next page, please, Tom. Most of the things stay the same there, other than looking at our demo farm educational supplies, which includes our Red Cedar demonstration farm, land judging contest, a number of other activities we do on the education front. Looking at average spending over the last several years, and not counting last year, given the pandemic, that would have skewed our educational spending quite a bit, but it was necessary, I think, to reduce that as well based on our average spending over the years. IT equipment, that has changed quite a bit, and that is a cost allocation that's provided by IT and spreading out those equipment replacements over a number of years. And I think with that, I guess if there's any questions on those expenses, I will try to answer them.
Any questions? Okay, thanks, Chase.
I guess we can, between Tom and I, we can probably talk about the general office stuff coming up here. Maybe if you want to go to the next page, Tom. And we just try to look at average spending on some of these line items and looked at where we can reduce, looking at copy machines and other expenses associated with that. And the last one there being conference and seminars. So historically our sponsorship for the Red Cedar Watershed Conference has been $5,000. We have been the sole platinum sponsor of that conference, and through consultation with several people, I put in there for a reduction in that conference sponsorship. So there'd be a $2,000 decrease in that expense as well. We would still be equivalent to all the other top sponsors. I believe we'd be a gold sponsor in this category.
Question here, please.
Sure.
This is for you, Mr. Chair. You've been involved with the Red Cedar Conference very closely for a long period of time. How do you feel about this reduction?
Yeah, no, I, of course, want to see as high as possible a contribution. I think it's a valuable, excuse me, a valuable conference. But over the years, in the beginning, Menominee and Dunn County had equal contributions. Over the years, Menominee has reduced its sponsorship down to 3,000. That's still, and those 3,000 would still be, along with Menominee, the largest by far contributions to the conference. Also, the conference has been able to operate at a surplus over the last, 5-6 years, and it's built up a bit of a cushion. So I think it's reasonable to reduce our commitment to 3,000. It won't affect the quality of the conference. If it needs to go back up for some reason in the future, we can talk about it.
Thank you.
I guess the next expenses here would be related to planning and zoning. Tom and I can do our best, but several of the explanations regarding salaries and fringes would likely remain the same, but we'll try to do our best to answer other questions you might have on particular line items. I also see Keith here as well, so.
Mr. Chair, I can just add a real quick update here because the timing of some of the things the changes that have taken place. The round one information, most of this was prepared in April and May. However, the note here on salaries and benefits were updated to reflect turnover, is intended to indicate to the committee that specific to this budget, we did factor in Mr. Colson's departure. So that is included in here where typically from a timing perspective, it would not have, but that was a significant change. So we were able to get that in before this was rolled out to the committee. So this does reflect, that's why you see such a significant decrease in that position. So I just wanted to point that out, from that perspective that, but then in refilling the position, it was utilized, which is our standard approach, the market rate, assuming family, health, and dental, because you don't know until you recruit somebody on board what their elections are going to be. So that's a conservative approach. So I just wanted to share that with the committee.
Any other questions anyone has?
Maybe what I'll do is just scroll down through here. So these are the other expenses that are similar to what Chase and I had. If there's any questions, I guess I'm just looking at numbers that pop out. There's a 46% decrease here in contractual consulting services, printing duplication, small items of equipment, membership dues. Looks like there's a lot of 0% increases here, but there are some notable reductions. Conferences, seminars. So any specific questions on any of these line items? And then down here is the salary and wage, and this is related to planning. So it looks like there's a significant, and that's for the new planning position that's going to be funded. It's my understanding. So I guess now we're moving. I don't want to get ahead, but so this is the end of zoning. And if there's no questions, I can move into the planning budget.
I'd have a question going back up to that contracting one that went down 46%. Keith, do you have an idea what that contractual consulting is?
I don't
Maybe
have,
that you moved over now, I can see it.
I don't have firsthand knowledge, but yes, when we did talk with Mr. Colson and this team, but in particular Bob in this, yes, he was focusing on the 5-year average and really of what the actual expenditures were. Intrinsically, I would also, without a lot of research time, expect that to go down, because if we're adding a position in the planning area, it may have some trickle back on because my understanding is part of the unfunding positions, there was increased use of consulting services to kind of help fill some of the void. I believe it's a combination of the two things.
All right, that's what I was wondering. Thank you.
Any other questions on zoning's expenses? If not, I can move down into planning. Okay, so there is a sizable increase here, and that's due to that new position being funded. And if we look at the rest of planning, it's a lot of, the salary and fringe on top here. There's some maintenance contracts showing an increase. And that's basically it. There's not, planning is fairly simple compared to the zoning side of things. So any specific questions on the planning expenses? Going once, going twice. Okay, and then the only other item left in the environmental service budget would be our capital section, and I'm going to turn this over to Chase.
Thanks, Tom. So part of the capital improvement plan, we would be slated for replacement of a 2006 Dodge Durango, one of 3 fleet vehicles, and so that's where that expense comes in there for that purchase.
Okay, any questions?
So I'm sorry, I'm a little slow on that. So that's not from borrowing, that's part of the budget, is that correct?
That's
correct.
borrowing.
I need to, I'm going to scroll up to the revenues. I believe that might be part of let's see here. Yes, long-term debt per the county board adopted capital improvement plan.
Right.
Was one purchase that was funded by debt.
Chase, what's your argument for that?
My argument is that, as part of maintaining our fleet, keeping it current would be, that's part of the capital improvement plan that was put in place to maintain our fleet, and that would be the request to that 2006 Dodge Durango would be next on the list for replacement, and therefore I included in the budget. That's the strongest argument I have for you right now, other than maintenance for fleet.
Yep. Any other questions?
And then if I may, Mr. Chair, there is a grant section too that I guess overlooked here, but there is a whole grant section, and if there's any questions on this, or maybe Chase would like to go through this section this is all things he administers.
Yeah, I certainly can go through that. So this is a lot of grants that we manage and maintain for many different things. A lot of them are impact our budget in a way that is money in, money out. So for example, we start looking at, let's see here, our land and water resource management grant, DACAP revenue. So that $80,000 line item, as well as a $28,000 line item. Those 2 line items are cost share funds that we receive through our state grant, and money that we expend for that is made up by reimbursement. So we're not spending any more cost share funds than we have money available for. So again, it's a separate part of the budget that's in a way kind of a wash, but snowmobile trail aids as well. Those are based on funds through the snowmobile trail program. Again, expenses incurred by the clubs are funneled through our office, and we make payments to them and then seek reimbursement from the state. Wildlife damage, the $30,000 line item, is in the same source as well, money in, money out. And then the next three line items here, the $270,000 and the $125,000, that is for 3 bridge replacements that have been funded through Snowmobile Trail Aid Grant or bridge grants. So we do have an expense for them, but we also have a revenue source for them. So you'll see a lot of these numbers show up more than once on this page. Red Cedar Conservation Farmers, 2022, this will be a $40,000 line item, as well as the Hay River Watershed Council of $20,000. Those are the anticipated grant amounts we are hoping to receive for applications for the producer-led or farmer-led watershed councils in the state. If we apply for $40,000 and $20,000 and we do not get those funds, then our expenses will not exceed that. So these numbers would be reflected based on what the grant ends up being. Here is the line item for this $159,372. That is for our soil and water staffing grant from the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection. That is the grant. That dollar amount there, again, was numbers from last year's allocation, so the 2021 allocation. Based on the current budget, I'm anticipating about a $28,000 increase for 2022 on this line item. However, that final allocation will not be expected until later on, hopefully September, October. And maybe if we have that allocation in hand, maybe there can be adjustment made at that time, but that is not reflected here. You'll see some of these other line items where there have been changes where there's no money proposed for 2022. Those are bridges, snowmobile bridges and activities that we are no longer doing, or they are complete. But I don't want to skip over the line item for the lake protection grant. That's the $57,435 from last year. We have no money budgeted for that this year. So that would be between that lake protection grant and the NACD technical assistance grant, the line item above it. Those two line items were what was funding our soil health specialist position. In addition, there was also about $10,000 of levy funds funding that position. In 2022, that funding, those grants are no longer, we did not receive a continued grant for those. And therefore, that was where my proposal to eliminate the vacant funded conservation planner position and allocate those funds to that soil health specialist position, creating a budget neutral scenario. Beyond that, the conservation aids project below the 2,325, so that is a 50-50 match grant from DNR, typically goes to habitat or public properties. So we'll anticipate continuing that program. And after that, looks like there's one line item there that is planning land use division related regarding on-site wastewater treatment replacement program. So that would be grants for replacement of septic systems. And I believe that program is actually discontinued for the moment. So that's where that line item would have decreased. Any questions on those portions of those grants? There might be one more page, Tom, below this one, I think, if I remember right. And this is just basically everything that I covered above is where you see it again as part of the revenue and expense side of things. So with the exception of that $1,000, so that would be, looks like a supplies line item for that watershed grant, which would be covered as part of that grant process. So.
Any further questions?
Supervisor Bjork, like one question for Tom.
Yeah.
That $159,000 for staff from the state. How many staff members is that covering? Is it 2 or 3 or that amount of that grant?
So Mr. Bjork, Supervisor Bjork, I can answer that. That grant currently funds the current portion would be it funds the full first position. So my position is fully funded. And then a second position is funded at 68% of the 70% that's statutorily required. So you could say about half of that position, so 1.5. As proposed for 2022, we would be looking at almost 2 positions, 1.7 positions would be funded for 2022. So the statutory authority is that the state shall attempt to fund 100% of the first position, 70% of the second position, and 50% of any third or subsequent position. And they have never funded it fully on that. And that's where you'll see in our legislative agenda and other lobbying efforts to fully fund that formula because it impacts our levy dollars. So right now it's around that 1.5, 1 3/4 funded by that state grant.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so based on our discussion, what we'll do is mull this over. If you have any questions, we can talk to Tom and Chase or Paul in the meantime, but we will try and come back to it at our next meeting and arrive at whatever decision we want to make about the various elements of it. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. Then we'll go back to item 8A, which is the legislative agenda. So, I guess to repeat myself, in order to facilitate this discussion, I went through the existing section that has to do with PR&D, the land use agriculture section, and identified those areas that we had in last year, but maybe we want to think about again, and then some that it seems like they're more consistent and we probably want to think about again. So the first one was that we had included last year was support allowing local control over land spreading of septic. It's exactly how it's written. I'm not sure, honestly, I can't remember how strongly we felt about that. Other people have any interest in having that continue as a legislative topic? I don't hear anybody. So for now, I'm going to say that we'll take that off the list. So that one, that the first A, which is in italics with a question mark, would not go forward. B is the establishment of the legacy fund to support core conservation, environmental programs and practices. This is something that Dan Prestabach was, strongly in support of. And the idea is something like what they have in other states, including Minnesota, where they have a designated funding source that generates significant money that can go towards whatever they think their conservation priorities are. And a lot of that is filtered down to the county level. Anyone have objections to that staying in there or concerns about it? Okay. And at the end of this, we'll go through and vote on the whole list. But C is request full funding for land conservation staff according to the formula contained in Chapter 9214. Chase just explained that. Given we strongly supported this last year and made some progress towards it. So anybody have a problem with keeping that in the agenda for next year? Okay, item D, advocate for increased state recycling grant funding to responsible units. This seemed to me like something that was a higher priority to us when we were operating as a responsible unit. Although it could be a responsible way to provide a reasonable way to request support for those entities that have taken on that responsibility. Anyone have any thoughts about this? Is this a priority for us? Is it something that's more appropriately taken up at the town and municipality level?
I think it's a good idea, but I think it's the big responsibility now would be with the responsible units, which we are not one of them anymore. But I think everything in solid waste and recycling that was up here is very important. But I think the focus has shifted to a different government unit that is responsible.
That's what I thought too. So in my thinking, this particular issue, while it's important, is not necessarily a priority for the county right now. And so I suggested maybe we want to leave that off. Anyone have a problem with leaving that off? Okay. And then the next one I wasn't sure about how that got in there or whether we had a discussion about it. I couldn't remember. It's for a state grant for disposal of deer carcasses. Any thoughts? It's a problem, it's for sure.
That was another one that the solid waste had taken care of to do it. But I think if it's that important, I don't see why the state leaves all the roadkill just laying on the road until they just rot away.
Yeah, I agree with you, Gary. I think it would be, given that's what's happening, the state should be providing a program to help fund the disposal of those carcasses at the local level, whether it's the county or the town or whoever does it's not important. I think the funding should be there for it. Are there is there anyone who thinks that should not be in our list, even though it's a little bit ancillary to our program? Okay. And F, approve the 13 water quality measures passed by the Assembly in 2020, but not yet acted upon by the Wisconsin Senate. These are the resolutions that came out of the Speaker's Task Force, which were passed by the Assembly, but were basically ignored by the Senate, continue to be ignored by the Senate, and they seem to be getting away with it so far. But those issues were all something we supported, and I think you can make a case that we continue to support them.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
I sent everybody a chat earlier, and I apologize for not sending it. I think we should leave the 13 water quality measures, but given our focus, I was wondering, there's one in there about an $850,000 proposal to support farmer-led conservation efforts. And I was wondering if we wanted to pull that, it is entirely possible that it's covered in F already, but I was wondering if we wanted to pull it out and highlight it. I don't feel strongly about it, but I do think it's pretty pertinent to our focus as a committee.
Yeah,
And it's in there in chat. I mean, it's not,
I see it.
well
I see it there now. I see it there now, Diane. And I actually think that is it would be a good thing to pull that out and highlight it. Would you like to make that a motion?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
To add language about providing $850,000 in assistance to farmers for conservation, including funding for managed grazing and funding for producer-led watersheds.
Okay. Anyone have a problem with adding that as, let's see, it would be a new G, I guess. Any problem with that for now? Okay. Then we'll go on to H, advocating for mandatory mercury lamp recycling. Again, it feels like something we had in there because of our recycling responsibilities. And then support for disposal of compressed and pressurized cylinders and tanks, which again was something related to recycling. So my thought was that these two probably are not priorities for us anymore and could be taken out. Anyone have an objection to that? And J, increase funding to support grants for local clean sweep hazardous waste disposal programs. So my thinking on this is that whether we're an RU or not, or the existing RUs, we need to reinstate some kind of clean sweep hazardous waste program. And the current grants are not adequate for the county, for example, to take that on, and probably for any of the locals to do it also. So my thought was that whoever does it, we as a committee should support the expansion of funding for that program. Any thoughts from anybody else? Okay, we'll leave it in there. And K, so at the last meeting, I mentioned that Bayfield County had submitted a long resolution to the Counties Association Convention regarding their desire to provide more meaningful permitting, siting, and regulatory authority for CAFO operations. So I just took out of that a simpler statement that basically says that we should update the state livestock siting regulations and procedures to provide local governments with meaningful permitting, siting, and regulatory authority over very large CAFO operations that has significant impact on environmental and land use concerns. Now, I know that's a pretty general resolution. That's deliberately so. My concern is that we open I think it's worthwhile to try and open the discussion about how do local communities have some increased input on some of these very large operations that are being proposed in other states, but also in Wisconsin. So for example, in Polk County right now, they're torn apart by a outside corporation funded largely by private equity investors who are proposing a 20,000 hog pig operation with ancillary facilities around various parts of the county. And they are like wringing their hands because I think they're trying to, I don't think there's much, here's what I think. I think there's not much support for this, but they also feel like there's not any way that they can have any decision about what happens. And I don't know how you provide that, but my intention in suggesting to you that we pass this is that I think it'd be worthwhile to try and find some way to provide it and to put our legislators on notice that we would like to have that happen. And one of the reasons I think it's important is because if we don't move in this direction, I can see in a few years, we will have a much more serious split between rural agriculture and rural residential land uses. Better to figure out some way to manage that than to have it turn into some kind of a unproductive conflict. That's my spiel. Any reactions from anybody?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
To me, this is a two-edged knife. First of all, like we all want like more local control, but it's also nice to have state standards where like one area is not being held at a disadvantage. What happens when you get a group of officials that are more environmentally sensitive, that they're overreactive? Because I can even say, in my own opinion, I thought our livestock study group had a bias against modern ag. So I hate to put the local ag community at a disadvantage because of some of the local officials that are being more restrictive than what state standards are. And yet I still think it's nice to have the some local control involved. So it's a item that needs more discussion, I think, to get a compromise, not because otherwise you get some people that are so that want more restrictions that it just makes it at a disadvantage to the local ag community. So
Okay.
there's got to be some kind of middle ground there, I would hope. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Supervisor Kinnear here. Thank you for piping in, Supervisor Bjork. I always enjoy listening to your point of view because it isn't always one that I can see easily, or think of. So thanks for talking, sir.
So anybody else? I think Supervisor Bjork, that was my hope in writing this the way I did, is that it was just sort of opening the door to that discussion. I understand that it's not an easy thing for us to do. So we don't have to vote on these. Again, we have one more meeting. But the intention of this is just to open that discussion kind of in the very way that you suggest. I mean, I think its reality is that nothing is going to change unless there's some kind of an agreement reached, which would not be easy to do. But this is my thought is that this is sort of pushing our legislators to recognize that they do need to think about how to come to some kind of an accommodation on this that deals with the interests of all parties. Any other questions on this? And the last, so if we leave this in there for now and we come back to it at our next meeting briefly, is that okay? And we have a problem with that? And then the last one, I realized after I wrote this that this is kind of also included in the health department resolutions. But my concern is just with a pretty straightforward thing is that we should be, because I hear from constituents from all parts of our county every month, a couple of times, that why don't we have a water quality testing program? Why don't we offer this to our citizens? Well, we all know that we're trying to, and we're going to try. Our hope is to have a voluntary one, but to do something that provides real services, it's going to require some funding, which we are struggling to find. So it seems to me like one of the core issues is the state should provide funding to counties so that we can establish a regular and ongoing groundwater testing and assessment program. And they should, furthermore, I think they should find some source of funding, some dedicated funds, like they do in some programs, that could go to fund that. Anyway, we can either take that out because it's somewhat the same in the health department, or we can leave it in as at your wish. Any thoughts on that?
I vote for leaving it in, Mr. Chairman. I think emphasizing it a couple of times is probably a very good idea to get this message communicated finally.
Okay, so what I'm hearing then is that this list, as we modified it, taking some items out, adding a couple in, is a good first draft that we can look forward, that we can take forward for further discussion at our next meeting. Also, though, this is the opportunity to add additional items if we want to. So I ask everybody to think about that. Are there some, I think every year it's good when we get up at it's frustrating, but when we get up at our legislative meeting and have a chance to talk to the legislators about key points, we draw those off these lists. So it's important. So that's what we'll do. We'll carry this over to the next meeting and have a final discussion at that point in time. Anything else? All right, then no announcements. We will have a meeting. I guess would be the 24th? Yeah. Tom is asking for agenda items. And with that, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.